I grew up playing games, and when I was little, I imagined making my own game. I would play games inspired by other games and act them out in our yard. Most of them were just pretty silly, but in my elementary school, we took typing classes, and I had already finished my lesson. However, we were supposed to continue finding something else to work on that involved typing. I was looking through the menus and just exploring that site, and I found a section that really excited me: code. The course itself wasn't very good, and it didn't seem that there was much explanation, but it could have just been that I was so young. Regardless, I continued to practice HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which is what I learned from that small course, though it was mostly HTML that I was using. And during this time, I was mostly limited to web editors like code.org or Replit, but I didn't really care. I kept on making all sorts of projects, writing websites about games I had played or other things that interested me. One of my most memorable projects is a quiz site that I had made with two of my other friends about Kirby. And I also remember turning in an assignment or two as websites. One of my favorite projects that I sadly had to abandon was a website inspired by a tool that our school used to manage important bookmarks for teachers and students. I had to abandon it because they blocked Replit, the site that I was using to develop it, and as a result, you just couldn't access the site anymore. I even managed to add a system where other people could request additions or links through email. The use of web editors helped me grow pretty quickly early on by reducing friction. But eventually, it started to limit me when I wanted to go on and learn Python and focus more on building apps or even games if I could. So I ended up building simple calculators or number guessing games, things that could be done in the terminal. However, not being able to make GUI apps without a website was incredibly frustrating. And eventually, I started learning C# because I wanted to try and make games with Unity, and was even watching Bracky's tutorials to figure everything out. I wasn't able to use Unity though, since I was still restricted to web editing tools. During one summer, we started going to the library a lot, and I quickly noticed that they did have public computers, and I could, in theory, use these computers to code. We talked with some of the people there at the library, and they actually went and installed VS Code on the computers for us. However, I quickly ran into a problem. I had never used a proper computer, so I had little to no understanding about app installation, or even that administrator privileges were a thing used to protect public computers, which restricted features like apps installation from public use. So even though I tried really hard, I never was actually able to get C# running on those computers. So I went a long while without being able to code because I ran out of ideas. There were just no projects that I could actually make with my limited resources. Eventually, I did realize that we had an older computer at home. It did work, and it ran. It was just really slow. So with permission, I was actually able to get C# and VS Code installed. I was very excited, and my first program was just a simple number guessing game in the terminal to test how everything felt. Our computer was much, much older and very, very slow. A single basic program could take 5 minutes or more to compile. But I was finally able to build things, and during that time, I even managed to make a JSON API for storing information easier, and also a storage catalog so that I could keep track of the amount of storage that I was using on the family computer. Both of these projects are on my GitHub page today still if you want to check them out. Eventually, I had realized that I was now at the point where I was completely capable of making games. And I had tried out Unity, now that I was actually very comfortable with C# and had a decent idea of what I was doing. But upon installing Unity, it took forever to load, and Visual Studio was even more sluggish. There was a good second or two between every time you pressed a key and when the character would actually show up in the text box, and I knew right there that Unity and Visual Studio were not going to work. Today I know about Godot, which would have actually ran fine on that computer, but at the time I was completely unaware something like that existed. Though, through pure grit and determination, I continued to research and found out that frameworks were a great alternative, and learned about a framework called Monogame, built off of the XNA framework, which was discontinued by Microsoft and distributed through NuGet. I started following through a tutorial and found it was much harder than using an engine, and there were a lot of concepts I still had yet to understand. But Monogame actually worked, and I was able to take advantage of the speed and lightweight properties of VS Code and actually be able to make and run games. So I started following through one of the tutorials on Monogame's website, and I swear, it took like a year to go through, and it didn't help that I was procrastinating a whole lot. While I was working on the Monogame tutorial, I found another framework called Foster, which is very tempting to try. It's a free and open source framework developed by a team of game developers that had released a very popular and successful indie game. But I stuck with Monogame because I had already put so much effort into learning it, and had also been warned about shiny object syndrome, where a developer keeps switching their tools and as a result never makes any meaningful progress. Regardless, I kept Foster in the back of my mind as something I wanted to try in the future. Right before I ended up finishing the tutorial, I was actually able to get my first laptop. It was modern and took seconds to compile programs instead of minutes. I actually finished the tutorial with that laptop, and felt pretty prepared to start making games. My first project was a game called Mini. It was a super small puzzle game. Its minimal size came from a huge tip that I learned to keep the scope of games small when you're first starting out game development to prevent a project from becoming too difficult or taking too long, and inevitably dropping it. I was able to make some progress, like implementing boxes that you can push and buttons that activate when the box is on top of them. But I never finished the project, or even a single level. This was because I had finally fell into the temptation. I'd kept Foster in the back of my mind and was wanting to use it unimaginably bad. So I caved. At first, I was just going to migrate my project to Foster, but eventually I decided to discontinue that project entirely. During the transition time, I had made a small clone game using a different framework called Pygame with the programming language called Python. And I had went on after to continue to get my bearings using Foster and to start developing a basic game engine for myself. And to do so, I developed a game, to say the least, though it really wasn't a game. It was just a project to help me practice things like loading assets, or moving sprites and testing collisions. And it took me some time just to get my bearings. I ended up taking a small break after finishing the initial version of my engine due to the cognitive weight of having to learn a framework with minimal documentation and learning game development and learning all these different subsystems. And I made a simple terminal clicker game with Python during that break. Around the time I got the very basic version of my engine working, Juniper Dev had announced her very serious game jam, which I thought was the perfect opportunity to test my engine and get some experience releasing my first game. The jam was about a week long, and I took 5 days to complete my game. The theme was released as Spin to Win. I did struggle in this jam. My engine was still pretty young, I had zero ideas, and it was my first time ever navigating itch.io. However, I did somehow manage to come up with an idea. What if the player was a potato defending a spinner from angry businessmen, and every round the wheel gives the player a reward to continue defending it? I couldn't think of any better idea, so this was what I went with, and it sufficed the spin to win theme. My biggest struggle, honestly, was with art. My main use for art was with my YouTube thumbnails, and outside of that, I don't really practice art at all. It helped that I chose a smaller resolution and made minimal animation frames, and somehow people did compliment my art if I remember correctly, but I don't know how. It was at least okay, though. I did learn a lot while working on this game. I learned a lot about time management, collision detection, and delays in game development, and this helped me to figure out what I needed in order to improve my engine. Timers were actually one of the major things that I went and implemented right after the game jam. And during the jam, I ran into a major problem. My version of Foster did not support any external UI libraries. And if you don't know what UI is, it's short for user interface, basically menus, like the inventory in Minecraft, or even the hotbar, or if you look at YouTube and you can see all the different videos. I didn't have any way to implement that in my game, so I had to draw text by hand in Sprite and load it into the game like an image. I was able to figure out that UI is a super important feature and started working on it also after the jam. After finishing the game jam and my earlier projects, I felt like I was finally able to tackle larger projects. I learned about systems like animation, collisions, entity interactions, primitive pathfinding, and general game loops. I already love games like Rainworld and Ori. They have harsh, indifferent environments that persecute the protagonist. But eventually, the protagonist grows and overcomes the challenge, or at least survives and gains emotional clarity. Rainworld's Survivor campaign is one of the best examples. Survivor gets separated from his family in a storm, and he grows up alone. By the end of his campaign, Survivor has learned to be content alone and gains emotional clarity. He stops mourning, and depending on what ending you pick, he can find his family again, further solidifying that emotional clarity. So, the first thing you need to make a game is an idea, which I didn't have any. But I knew that I wanted to make something inspired by Rainworld. So I thought the best way to come up with a game idea like this would be to center it around a real problem. The developer of Rainworld did something similar. Rainworld was heavily inspired by the broken and graffiti-ridden alleyways and how everything seemed so alien during his time in Korea as an exchange student. And I eventually came up with an idea: social isolation. Having a general theme, or seed, would help me to design everything around that. The first step was to design the world, and I thought it would be interesting to make the world for the game a bitter, cold tundra to fit the theme of isolation. And having the world already predefined allows me to start designing the creature. I also thought having a cold tundra would allow me to make some really cool biological adaptations for the creature. I designed a creature that was also inspired by slugcats. I decided that their main adaptation to the cold would be a boiling sack, an organ near their stomach that holds scalding water or even hot stones or coals. It distributes heat throughout the creature's short, stout body. And they would also have a heavily insulated digestive tract in order to not get internal burns when ingesting these hot materials. And note that the boiling sac does not generate heat, it only redistributes it. The creature can also have large amounts of fluffy, voluminous fur to insulate themselves. With the creature's main biology defined, I had lots of fun working on their culture and social construct. My favorite concept is that the creatures apply powdered dyes to their fur. The color conveys their job or purpose in the colony. Green is for adults who scavenge for resources and then prepare those resources into bowls or cups or even more dye. Orange is for the newly wedded creatures. Pink is for the newborns or young children. Silver is for local authorities. Gold is for the government authorities, though they mostly just keep things organized. Red is for criminals, and blue is for merchants, though only much larger colonies would actually have merchants. Also note that though local authorities and government authorities have gold and silver dyes, it does not mean they have more honor or privilege than anyone else. These creatures value humility and teamwork above all else, which creates an interesting social behavior that causes this system to be really expressive. These creatures cannot reach their back or some parts of their tail. This means that colony members help apply dyes to the areas that cannot be reached. And as a result, the application of these dyes is a highly social activity. These creatures also have a simple language. It consists of only 3 consonants and 3 vowels. As a result, these creatures generally prefer to use body language instead of speaking, and use speech mostly for important warnings. They also use the language for songs. They enjoy singing little hymns or lullabies that their mothers would sing to them when they were young. This is actually where they get their name from. I have named these creatures Chorum, a twist on the word chorus. My game will be centered around this one Chorum, who is exiled from his colony at a young age and forced to learn to survive alone in the bitter tundra. So what am I working on right now? Currently, I'm getting my engine mature enough to actually make this game in the first place. I'm getting pretty close, and at the time of writing the script, the only thing I really need is a UI prototype, which I am actively working on right now. After I get my engine ready, I will start working on the first level, which will serve as both a tutorial and an initial prototype. I will be documenting my progress regularly and releasing public playtests as I get more progress, allowing you to directly interact with my game and give feedback along the way.